Hey YouTube, Reading Ready here with aspirations of being the next All-State guy. Today, we're going to start reading some stuff from TIFU. The first story comes from Eugene Ages. I had 4 years of ROTC in high school and 2 semesters of American history, 2 separate teachers. So not a history major, but I've absorbed a lot of material on the Civil War. And I realized today that it was horse and I got hoodwinked. Before that, like most people, when someone asked me why the Civil War happened, my answer would have been slavery. And that definitely was an issue, but my teachers presented it as though it was not the forefront issue. They gave me a lot of info, what the economy was like and what the other industries aside from slavery were doing, how industry was just taking off in the North, and what Europe was doing and why that was important, etc. There was a lot, and it made sense, because I found it very reliable that politicians and businessmen were doing underhanded stuff and try to hide it behind around the slavery issue. So they essentially presented me with the idea that slavery was not the main reason for the Civil War. It was business. Again, super plausible. This was all being presented with an attitude of, now let me tell you what really happened. So I'm 6 semesters of this stuff, and no one had even mentioned the Declaration of Secession, the actual physical documents the states wrote when they left. I had no idea they existed. I read them all today, and holy that stuff reads like a dystopian nightmare. They were all about slavery and how it was the greatest institution ever conceived, and that it had to be protected. There was no way this wasn't the forefront issue after reading those papers. I messaged some friends with the same class to make sure it wasn't me remembering things wrong, and I was. I told them my discovery. They had never heard of the Secession Declaration either. Reddit let me know earlier how absolutely wrong I was, and I don't care about people calling me dumb, I'll own that. I trusted my teachers to give me facts, and I got propaganda. The second story comes from user Defenestrate Me Now. Last night, my wife's boss from her brand new job invited us over for dinner. On the drive over, my wife reiterated many times to me just how important it was to make a good impression. I scoffed and arrogantly informed my silly wife that I was always going to make good impressions. My wife's boss is a single lady in her 50s, so it was just the 3 of us. And we chit-chatted over drinks, salads, and seemed to be really hitting it off. She laughed at my well-timed, perfectly appropriate jokes, and my wife seemed pleased. Soon, she brought out the main course, a nice big juicy steak for us. As I began to cut into my steak, I was discouraged to discover how undercooked the steak was. Now I've had my fair share of rare steak. I prefer medium, but I can handle rare. But this was several minutes on a hot grill short of rare. I probably could have resuscitated the cow had I tried. Instead, I sat there fidgeting with my knife and fork, worrying about how I was going to get away with not eating the steak. Claim I'm vegan? No. Already feigned great enthusiasm upon seeing steak. Just then, our hostess excused herself into the kitchen to take care of some dessert preparations. As I looked across the fancy dining room table at the open window of his 3rd-story apartment, a cartoon light bulb appeared over my head. So I committed. I grabbed the steak with my hand, gently shook off the juice, and executed a perfect throw right through the center of the open window. Now here's the big-time screw-up. The window wasn't open. It was the cleanest freaking window you've ever seen in your life. That is, until my mostly raw slab of steak slammed up against it and slowly slid down, leaving a trail of bloody juice in its wake. My wife, whose steak was a nice medium rare and was unaware of the predicament, turned, jaw dropped, and stared at me like I was an alien from another planet. This look then slowly morphed into one of, "There is no place on this planet you can ever hide from me," expressions of demonic anger. My wife's boss heard the thud of the steak on window impact and came quickly. She took in the scene, the steak sitting on the windowsill, the bloody trail, and my empty plate, and they gave me an inquisitive, puzzled look. I just don't know what to say. It felt like a minute of silence, but it was probably 3 or 4 seconds. Finally, the best I could manage was, I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz, and I don't know. We're just cutting it, and it slipped. Just ask my wife, I really am a klutz. Right, honey? Cue no help coming from that direction. I'll clean this up. I can't believe this. I'm so sorry, etc., etc. Now, both women continued to stare at me like I had escaped from the loony bin as I smeared the blood around the window with the cloth of my napkin, dusted off the steak, and continued to mutter my incoherent explanation. I knew no one was buying the story. I knew what I had to do, and I sheepishly returned to my seat and proceeded to eat every bite of the disgusting, cold, chewy, bloody, raw steak. Remained pretty quiet for the rest of the evening. My wife's only 2 words to me since the incident are, "I'm fine." Update, just got the first post "I'm fine" communication from my wife via text who's at work. Good news, boss's name, and I had just had a good laugh about how much of a f***ing idiot you are. Now the next story comes from user Dr. McSinister. Recently I traveled to Denver, Colorado with my wife and my wife's parents. As a resident of a non-legalized state, and as someone who is too much of a pansy to regularly buy illegal drugs, the thing I was looking forward to most was the chance to buy fancy, legal weed. So what could possibly go wrong? So the first thing I do upon driving, and after successfully ditching the in-laws, is drag my wife to a nearby dispensary for a shopping spree. And oh my god, it was just like my dreams. Tons of different options, and neat little sample jars, and a team full of helpful stoners walking me around to various strains. Are you looking for like a mellow or a body high? Or do you want something that gives you a bit more of a pep of energy? Or are you hoping for something that just take the stress off? Yes, yes, and yes, I reply eagerly like a fat kid in a candy store, and request an 1/8 ounce of about 7 different options. In hindsight, if I learned anything from this experience, is that my math and science teachers never taught me basic information like, what is an ounce? Or, how much weed can a person consume in a single week? So sure, I can tell you when 2 speeding trains leaving separate stations will collide, or recite Avogadro's number, but it turns out that none of that information is particularly relevant to getting high in a responsible and efficient manner. Surprise, surprise. And it was at this dispensary that I also learned that I can't actually smoke in public places, including the hotel that my wife and I were staying at. As a result, before leaving, I begged my wife to buy some edibles that I could munch on until we found a place to properly get lit. So after expressing shock as to the absurd volume of drugs that we were buying, unlike me, she is the product of a private school and understands the imperial measurement system. She relents and we walk out the store with what felt like a dump truck of weed and a small package of seemingly innocuous ginger snap cookies. When we finally get back to the hotel room, I tear those bad boys open, only to find a dozen tiny cookies roughly the size of a quarter. What the fuck, Denver? Seeing the skepticism and hunger in my eyes, my wife warns me that I should go easy and look at the back of the package before trying one. Dose size, 1/2 cookie. I read silently as I start taking micro bites from the edges, like a giant chinchilla gnawing on a sunflower seed. But what kind of savage only eats half a cookie? So a second later, I covertly pop the remainder into my mouth. And then I quickly stuff 2 more cookies in my mouth for good measure the moment my wife turns back. So we may not have legal weed back home, but I routinely devoured an entire package of Milanos in one sitting without breaking a sweat. So it's your move, tiny ginger snaps. About 30 minutes later, we're in the back seat of her parents' rental car on the way to dinner, and that's when things start to go wrong. My stomach growls loudly and angrily. My wife looks at me with inquisitive eyes that seem to say, "Diarrhea?" But I merely clutch my tummy and mumble something about altitude sickness. "You didn't eat a whole cookie, did you?" she asks, 10% in genuine concern and 90% in seething irritation. "Of course not," I respond, avoiding eye contact for the remainder of the car ride. A few minutes later, we're climbing out of her parents' rental car and heading to some trendy farm-to-table restaurant. I don't remember how I made it to my seat, and I don't remember even looking at the menu, but I do remember the concerned look on the waiter's face as he asked me if I was doing alright. "Keep it together, man," I say to myself, but my wife's sudden groan suggests that I may have also said that to the waiter. Things are going downhill fast. The waiter nods sympathetically, takes our orders, and then heads to the next table. The moment he walks away, my wife starts staring daggers at me. I start to worry that the jig is up. "You are sweating from your entire face," she says with both pity and disgust. Not quite knowing what to do, I reach for a napkin and proceed to blot my cheeks, nose, neck, chin, and forehead. At this point, my wife's mom looks over at me with some concern. "Are you alright?" she asks kindly. "Yeah, the food's just a bit spicy," I reply, far too quick to realize that we literally just ordered and that there is nothing on the table except for a basket of dinner rolls. My wife kicks me under the table to grab my attention. "Bathroom now," she hisses. "Get it together." I reluctantly get up from the table and head to the toilet. After splashing several handfuls of water on my face, I approach the urinal and start to pee. Now, one of the more disconcerting effects of those tiny ginger snap monsters is the feeling that time has become untethered from reality. As I'm peeing, I start to get a very unsettling feeling that I've been taking a piss for the better part of an hour, and that my wife must be pacing around the restaurant worried about me. Deep down, I know this is absurd. I've been peeing all my life, sometimes multiple times a day, and I've probably taken more than 50,000 leaks. and usually it only takes about a minute at most. So given that my typical pee is no more than 60 seconds, and given that it feels like I'm about halfway done, that means that I've probably only been standing here for about 30 seconds, alright? The guy at the urinal next to me doesn't respond, but instead starts shuffling away from me midstream, like a startled penguin. I try, albeit unsuccessfully, to break eye contact. After finally finishing, I again splash some water on my face and return to my seat, being sure to apologize to the table for being gone such a long time, in case my math was off. Next, I try to briefly engage in some small talk with my wife's father, but I'm far too high to understand what either of us are saying. Not wanting to start laughing uncontrollably at the wrong moment, or really at any moment, I figure the safest idea is to nod my head periodically and drink a ton of water. Nothing cures mental fatigue like water, right? To my wife's horror, I stand up, grab the water glass, and thrust it to the waiter, who unfortunately is on the opposite side of the restaurant. But he turns out to be really cool, and after making his way to our table, tells me that he'll do his best to keep me stocked with ice water for the rest of the meal. He also helpfully suggests that if the dinner rolls aren't too spicy for me, I should eat one or two so that I'm not sitting there on an empty stomach. Smart man. However, after going through all the bread on the table and 3 glasses of water, I start to get worried that I need actual food to offset the growing paranoia from those tiny ginger snap devils. Do you think I should flag down the waiter again and ask what's taking so long? I suggest helpfully to my wife. What? We literally just ordered 3 minutes ago. And at that exchange, my wife loses her cool. How many cookies did you eat? She demands. Whoa, easy there, Turkamada, I respond, somewhat horrified at her outburst. I've had a few cookies, but keep it down. I don't want your parents to know how I am right now. Really? They're sitting 2 feet away from you. They know. I look up for the first time, and both of my in-laws are just staring at me for what literally felt like an eternity.
Nice.
Hey YouTube, thanks for listening. Make sure to leave a comment about your favorite story down below. Also, remember to like and subscribe for more content.